Hello, I'm Malcolm Hazlitt. Using war diaries, letters and a Churchill Fellowship research from along the race route, the book The Long Flight Home recreates one of the most important and largely forgotten chapters in world aviation history. In this episode, we meet its author and Sunday Mail columnist, Lainie Anderson. Next on Airtime. It's with enormous pleasure that I don't have Janice next to me. No, that's not what I should be saying. It's Lainie Anderson, who's been a weekly columnist in Adelaide Sunday Mail since 2007 and previously worked at the Herald Sun in Melbourne and the Times in London. In 2017, she travelled to 9 countries on a Churchill Fellowship. Opinion writer from the Sunday Mail, Lainie Anderson, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Malcolm.
You don't have the flu, do you, like Janice?
I certainly don't, no.
I'm pleased to hear that.
And I'm glad that Janice has stayed away, because I don't want her either.
Quite right.
Yeah.
That's exactly what she said.
Yeah.
There's no point in coming and infecting everyone.
Indeed.
Lainie, I read your column every week, and we will talk about that because I love your column.
Thank you.
And I love the personal stuff that you talk about with your family and stuff within the column. But the book, I'm very impressed with. And Sunday Mail actually ran a little excerpt from it, didn't it?
They did, yeah. Just as we were launching it. Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah, I've been very, very thrilled by the generosity and the help that my sort of News Corp family has given me with the book, because it's my first novel. So it was, yeah, just brilliant of them to support me with it.
But it's brilliant that you did this, because you're right, it's a largely forgotten story. And as you say in the book, or I don't know whether it's in the book or whether it was just about you, but it's as important as man landing on the moon.
Yeah, well, the Sunday Mail actually started it all off for me, Malcolm, because it was way back in 2009, a Sunday Mail reader, who was also an old schoolmate from Middleton High School on York Peninsula, he contacted me and said, Lainie, you've got to write a story on the Vickers Vimy out at the airport. And I sort of got into the story, went out to the airport, remembered, oh my God, that's the Vickers Vimy, you know, we all remember.
Did you see it as a kid?
Yeah. And you would have as well, wouldn't you?
My father got a first car from a motorbike in 1956. And so Saturday afternoons we went for drives.
Yes.
And in those days we went often to the airport to watch the planes taking off, never thinking we would ever fly, you know?
Yeah,
In fact,
it was something very exotic in those days, wasn't it?
So exotic. Dad was born in 1914 and he used to say, I remember as a young man seeing the first plane fly over and just being spellbound with the fact that that was up in the air.
I bet.
And we used to stand in front of as small children, stand in front of the glass window, looking in, but not sort of wanting to touch it almost, but not really understanding its significance to our history. Yeah,
so, well, I went down and sort of reacquainted myself with it. And when I started looking into the story of Ross Smith, the pilot, he was one of, let alone the first man to fly across the world from England to Australia in 1919, but he was also Australia's most decorated airman from the First World War. He was Lawrence of Arabia's pilot. And here we are, we've forgotten about this incredible South Australian. And so I wrote my first column in 2009 and I just received an avalanche of emails and letters from readers saying, oh, please keep this story going. So here I am 10 years later, crazy plane lady, still talking about it.
Not at all, because I've been trying to find somebody to talk about this.
Yeah, right.
And it was actually difficult to find, like, who do you email? I wanted an interview with somebody about this plane. And the fact that, of course, it sort of got lost within the modernisation of the Adelaide airport and was in its own little sort of cubby house all by itself. And now, of course, that's changing.
Yeah, so we were really fortunate that the federal government and the state government just before the federal election announced a commitment to moving the plane into the new terminal as part of the current $160 million expansion. And Adelaide Airport Limited are also matching that with another $2 million. So we've got $6 million getting prioritised into this project, which is just fantastic for the people of South Australia. Oh,
but for all travellers that come through the airport.
Absolutely, yeah. Because when I was on my Churchill Fellowship, to go back to your point about man landing on the moon, I did my Churchill Fellowship to basically build a business case, because South Australians are so bad at celebrating our own history. I thought if I go overseas and ask international experts what they think about the flight and the plane, and hear their views within the context of international aviation in the last 100 years. And they were just unbelievably gobsmacked that the plane is in a car park,
yes.
that it's not gold-plated, basically.
Yes.
And they said this is, in its day, it was as awe-inspiring as man landing on the moon, and that if it was in America, it would be in the middle of the Smithsonian.
Oh, absolutely.
And it should be as iconic to Australia as the spirit of St. Louis is to America.
Yep.
Yeah, so
and there would have been a movie made about the story, a proper movie made about the story, and it would have been... And I kept thinking, when I read the first part of your book, I thought, there's got to be a movie script here somewhere.
Yeah, well, that would be so fantastic.
South Australian Film Corporation, there's got to be a movie script here somewhere.
Well, funnily enough, I am actually, another project since my Churchill Fellowship, I've actually teamed up with my husband and a girlfriend who's a fantastic producer, television producer, and we're actually producing a documentary on the air race.
Oh, great.
And Andy Thomas, the astronaut, who was inspired by the Vimy as a boy, is presenting and narrating it for us. So that's due out at the end of the year.
That's just brilliant. But you see, that's why this is so important, the inspiration for who knows in the future, you know.
Exactly,
who knows who's going to see that and think, this was only 100 years ago.
Exactly.
Look what we're doing now.
Yeah, and that's why when I got back from my fellowship, I teamed up with Greg Mackey, the Chief Executive of the History Trust of South Australia, Greg Weller, who is at RAF out at Edinburgh. We've got a whole group of people from the Aviation Museum, from Veterans SA, from RAF Association, and we've formed this committee, and we've been working to celebrate the Epic Flight Centenary right across 2019.
Fantastic.
And in Term 3, we'll be working with schools across the state with a big schools competition to inspire kids, because that's really what we want to do.
Brilliant.
We wanted to get that plane moved so kids could look at it like we did when we were growing up, and we wanted to have a schools competition and build a website that is a lasting resource for kids to be inspired.
Because when you think about it, in those days, South Australia, whilst it was this sort of experimental utopian society that came here to settle in this state, which is why we say A instead of dance instead of dance. But even that's been forgotten. In many ways. We've forgotten where we came from. We've forgotten that the state went bankrupt when they built a railway station, and some of the founding fathers went bankrupt along with it. I'm actually directing a play about that.
You're telling me things I don't know, Malcolm.
No,
so
well...
maybe that could be my next book.
Well, yes, actually, his life story, Hardy, who built the house up at Mount Lofty and named all of the area around there Piccadilly, because his housekeeper said one day, I'm just going to take the kids down Piccadilly, referring to Piccadilly in London, and that's how Piccadilly here on the other side of Mount Lofty got its name.
I did not know that. Wow.
He died almost a pauper, sadly, because he lost all of his money when the state went broke.
Wow.
Wow. So, you know, there are all these stories out there.
So many.
That if you're living in another state, to me, the Victorians and people from New South Wales and certainly Perth have got their own stories they seem to have been proud of and done something with. But we've been a bit short on that, particularly with something like this.
I just can't believe how many South Australians, when you actually talk to them about it, go, oh, I remember that. You know, I met a lady the other day who, when she was in her 80s, and when they went for a swim down the beach, they'd say, oh, we're going for a Vickers Vim. So the story has actually been a strong part of the culture. It's just in the sort of the last 20, 30 years, I think, has
every generation forgets what was important to the generation before.
Well, these guys, back in 1919, the four men, there were 3 South Australians and a Victorian, they basically became Australia's first rock stars, international global superstars. Because I should have actually sort of started by giving you some background, Malcolm, because It was
We've still got some time, don't panic.
It was straight after the First World War.
Yep.
Billy Hughes announced the prize of £10,000 for the first Australian airman to fly from England to Australia in under 30 days. 6 Australian crews took up the challenge, despite the fact that the newspapers of the day said this is going to end in death because the planes were made of wood and fabric.
I know, that's...
It's just crazy, hey. No closed cockpits.
I know.
There were no airfields after India.
Your explanation of the way you've written the book as from the...
Wally Shires, the perspective.
Mechanic, was he?
Yeah, one of the mechanics, yes.
And your description of him sitting in the back with his toes freezing and not being able to stretch out and the discomfort of that. It's been very cold here in South Australia a couple of months ago, and I was thinking, after reading it, I was thinking, oh, it must have felt like this. But I was nowhere as cold as he must have been.
Oh, look, when they were at 9,000 feet with open cockpit, they were down the back of a fuselage, which was more like a coffin, made with wooden fabric, just a tiny bit of plywood that was separating them
that he was sitting on
these vast open skies. And yeah, all of their tools and the spare parts the mechanics had, and they had massive fuel tanks right in front of them. But if they crashed, they would have been blown to smithereens.
But the tools must have been not that much because you couldn't take the weight.
No, yeah, you couldn't take the weight, but they would have had bits and pieces, and they needed lots of spare parts and things as well. They took the clothes on their backs and a toothbrush. That was the only thing they were allowed to take because
glad I wasn't sitting in the plane next to them. We're going to be back in a tick talking more with Lainie about this and her career as a writer. Stay with us. Our special guest on this episode of Our Time is writer Lainie Anderson. We were talking about the plane and how fragile that was.
Yes, and I mean, the fact that they flew 11,000 miles or over 18,000 kilometres in this plane that just defied the odds. You look at it today.
What's the chewing gum story?
Okay, so there are so many stories of ingenuity that got them from England to Australia. The chewing gum story was they landed in Cairo and they knew that they were having problems with one of the engines in the air. They came down over the Mediterranean from Crete, and Wally Shires took off his engine cowling and noticed that there was a crack in the induction pipe. That's made of aluminium, so there was no fixing it. They had to wait for a new Rolls-Royce engine to be bought from England, which would mean they were going to miss their 30-day deadline. And he came up with this grand idea of chewing gum, creating a big wad of gum, stretching it out, wrapping it around the induction pipe.
Good heavens.
Just amazing. In Surabaya in Indonesia, the mud was so thick that the Vimi's wheels kept sinking down, and they got villagers to bring the bamboo matting walls of their homes and laid these 2 300-metre runways so the plane could take off over this bamboo matting. Like twice in Singapore, Jim Bennett, the other mechanic, the racetracks were so short and the Vimi's such a big sort of cumbersome plane that he actually, as they were coming into land, he jumped out of the back cockpit and slid down the fuselage to the tail wing to drop the back of the plane and stop it really quickly.
Good
heavens. And in Pisa, in Italy, it was so...
They hit the tower and that's why it's...
No, but they actually... I had to go up to the top of the tower to look to where they landed because they landed so close to the tower back in 1919, yeah, which is just amazing. So I had to get my bearings by going up into the tower. That was a great day. But... it was so wet that every time Ross Smith tried to take off, the front of the plane would dip down. Yes. So he made Jim Bennett, the mechanic, run along holding the back of the fuselage, and he said to him, now when you feel the wheels taking off, you've got to sprint and jump into the cockpit, and if you don't make it, catch a train to Rome and we'll catch you there. So, they're just crazy guys.
Because when you think about
ingenious.
No landing strips, nobody making parts for planes anywhere.
No.
You've just got to, and nothing but a compass.
Yep.
And the stars.
Yeah, so when it was cloudy, Keith Smith, who was Ross's brother and navigator, he sat with a map looking at a speed indicator and a compass and sort of marking with a map every 15 minutes where he thought they might be, because that's all he could do. And the first day, 6 hours over France, they couldn't see because of this raging snowstorm. And when they finally found a gap in the clouds and shot down, they were only 40 miles from where he'd guessed they might be. With just like, they're just unbelievable. They were so, and they were South Australians. Yeah. So they should be celebrated, and it's so fantastic that we're doing that this year.
Yeah, well, it's for all of us to make the effort to find out more. That's the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So speaking of finding out more, let's talk a bit about you.
Okay, sure.
I love your column because it's about stuff that's happening in the world. Obviously, it's an opinion column. Where do the ideas come from?
Oh, gee, well, it's been 12 years now, so, I mean...
You'd think you'd run out of ideas by now.
Oh, look, most Thursday mornings I think I have, Malcolm, and I say to my husband, I can't do this anymore. But, no, I mean, I'm really lucky. Readers give me ideas. Generally, something will happen over the week. I've had, I reckon, 5 editors now in the 12 years, 4 or 5, and one of them... My first one actually said to me, just write whatever you feel angry about, sad about, happy about. Whatever triggers an emotion in you is likely to trigger an emotion in the reader, and that's what we want. Yep. So, you know, I'm called an opinion columnist, but I'm not trying necessarily to change opinions. I'm just trying to make people think about how they feel about a particular topic. Yeah. And
that's the truth. It does. These columns, I think, are really valuable because you have a way of thinking about something in particular and you think, oh, yeah, that's right, because I'm thinking it. And somebody says something completely different that challenges that and you think, oh, maybe I didn't quite get all the information in the first place. Yeah. Finding that information for you, is that difficult?
Oh, gee, no, not now that we've got Mr. Google. You know, it's quite easy. But, I mean, I try to, you know, always be listening to the radio. I watch, you know, three lots of news services most nights. I obviously read the papers each day. So, you know, you start to, by Thursday is my column writing day. And, you know, from Sunday through, I'm thinking, okay, if I want sort of 3 different themes in a column, there might be one little theme and there's another bit, and it's sort of like pulling together a jigsaw, really. Yeah. Yeah. I'm really lucky. I have my husband Max is a brilliant writer. He's a travel writer. We met when he was in England and I was here, and he's always been fantastic at telling me the days...
Throwing you ideas? Or?
Throwing me ideas, but also having a first read and saying whether it's really bad, whether it's a do-over or whether it needs, you know, tweaks. And so, yeah, we're a good team.
Did you always feel this was where you're going to go in life, writing?
I was really lucky. Yarn Event was huge, you know, in the 80s. Okay. And... She was definitely a huge role model for me. So I loved, you know, I loved 60 Minutes back in the day and A Current Affair, and yeah.
So you're the Andy Thomas,
yeah, so
to speak. You're inspired by.
I totally was inspired by her. I thought she was just amazing. But also all the Mike Willises, the Ray Martins, Ita Buttrose. Like the first time I got to interview Ray Martin, it was just like one of just the most amazing days of my life, because he was just, I idolised him when I was thinking about going into journalism, and I came here to McGill University to study journalism after doing high school at Millington High School over in York Peninsula, so really lucky.
It's a big jump.
Yeah, and then, but it was a very sort of small pool of journalism students that they actually took. Okay. So I was really lucky. But then I just got into country newspapers with the goal of getting to the Herald Sun, was where I wanted to. I don't know why. I just really wanted to work for the Herald Sun.
Again, that's a big jump. That's a big jump too, isn't it?
Well, I went to Mildura to the Sunraysia Daily and then the Shepparton News. And then to the Weekly Times, so all sort of with a country feel, until I got into, I really wanted to do politics. Right. And Jeff Kennett was the Victorian Premier when I was doing politics, so that was really brilliant.
So the London end?
I was really lucky that I went on a trip following Jeff Kennett on overseas on one of a junket, as we journos call them.
Yes.
And I caught the bug.
I must ask you, as you've said that word, where does the term come from? Is it because of... No, but well...
I have no idea.
The old terms of junkets, like you'd pour milk into the retina, I think it's called, and that would congeal, so you'd end up with a... of something. Can't find a word for...
Yeah, OK, well...
And in a way, that's what happens. All the journos come together as a...
That's probably what it is then.
Maybe that's where it goes.
Probably what it is.
Never
sort of
asked that
like
question before.
You know, back in the day when newspapers, you know, sent journalists overseas and got trips like that, it was just so fantastic. Now, you know, they use bureaus in London or whatever to cover that sort of thing. But yeah, that gave me the travel bug, and I was lucky enough to go. I got some fantastic experience at the Herald Sun, and so when I got to London, I was offered casual work at lots of different papers, from the Daily Star, the Daily Mail, the Sun. The Sun told me I was too broadsheet because
really?
I couldn't write about, you know, boobies and all of that. I was way too straight to be writing for the Sun, so they said you're too broadsheet, go away. But then the Times took me on permanently as with a permanent role and I was there for a couple of years.
How amazing! So why didn't you stay? Why did you come home?
Broken heart, Malcolm. Why does a girl do anything?
I don't know.
I was 30. I had a broken heart. I needed to come home to be closer to Mum and Dad. Yeah.
That's lovely.
Came back here, then met Max.
But having the overseas experience, it does give you another edge, doesn't it, to what you're doing?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if it's an edge, but it's just a wider perspective. And also... But
would you have appreciated that big trip had you not been in that country and then flown back to this country? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe not.
This is a 24-hour trip for us. But a how many day trip? 30-day trip?
28 days.
28 days for them.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, and when you've been, say, in the UK, and you think, you know, so much of our language, so much of our customs, our sayings, they all come from there, and yet we're over here.
Yeah, I think...
That always impresses my brain. I think that's incredible that...
I don't know if it was just the time of life, you know, my late 20s, or whether it was being in London, but I definitely got a much... I sort of went from just being work and play, or work and drink beer, basically, to I got a much, you know, a love of culture, history. You know, I started running. I just became a more like rounded person, I think.
I get it.
So, and then which probably made me more open to something like this story when I came back.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
And we'll be back with Lainie in just a moment. It's almost time to go. Just one last chat with Lainie Anderson. What do you want to do when you grow up, Lainie?
Oh, gee, that's one question I haven't thought of. Do you know, travel. Can I travel, please?
You can.
I know. My charitable fellowship was 9 countries, 7 weeks, no husband, no kids. I'll do that again when I grow up. That'd be really nice.
But what were you doing on that with the book, researching the book?
Yes.
So did you go to every place that they landed?
No, I wasn't allowed to go to any of the Middle Eastern countries. You can't go anywhere where there's an advice from the Australian government.
That makes perfect sense.
Yep. So, but yeah, I did Europe and then leapfrogged over the Middle East to India, Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia.
Right.
Yeah. So it was just magical. Amazing.
One last question. When they hit Australia, did they land in Darwin?
They landed in Darwin.
Did they have to land, well, they must have had to land between Darwin and Adelaide.
Yes, they ducked across to Brisbane and then down to Sydney, Melbourne.
Oh,
but
the short route.
It took them 3 months to do that because the engines kept breaking down. Basically, the engines hit Darwin and went, not going any further.
So where can we find this book?
So Long Flight Home is available in all good bookstores, of course, or from the Wakefield Press website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations. I think it's a great story. Film coming up next. And it's just been great to have you as a guest on Our Time.
Really appreciate it.
Hopefully next time Janice will be with us, but in the meantime, keep yourselves nice until we see you again. Bye.